Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
When something goes bad, painfully bad, and stays unpleasant for an extended period, human nature is such that we avoid that thing. We don't want to hear about it, we don't want to talk about it, we ignore it. That kind of behavior is not necessarily all bad, especially when it comes to the issue of the economy. More pointedly, real estate and jobs. Welcome again, and thank you for supporting and watching the longest-running dialogue on business and public policy here in North and South Carolina. On this edition, we talk real estate, both commercial and residential practitioners here, and they're beginning to publicly assert that, yes, it does seem like there's a turn for the better in activity. We start in just a moment.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded December 2nd, 2011. On this week's program, Edward Fritsch of Highwood Properties, David Lockwood of Colliers International, Patrick Mason of the Center for Carolina Living, and Pat Riley of the Allen Tate Companies. Now, Chris William.
2012.
Hello and welcome to our program. Offline here, been talking about, no surprise, real estate here. David, I want to start. We'll start with you and kind of go around the table here. And by the way, guys, welcome and thank you for having you all here.
Good. Thank you.
David, we'll start with you. Are conditions improving in real estate? You know, we've been so down on it now for 3 years. We've seen nothing but gray. Is there a turn? Have we made the turn?
I think we clearly have made the turn. I think Pat will address that from a residential standpoint. But from commercial, the activity has increased. A lot of people have been acquiring space, albeit from a rental market, not from a purchase standpoint because of the liquidity issues that are still out there. But businesses are getting back to business. They are leasing space, and most importantly, we see a very strong manufacturing front coming through the Carolinas right now.
Pat?
We felt that that last October, October 10, was the bottom residentially. Remember last year, in the first half of the year, we had a tax credit. Looking back, that was probably one of the worst things we could do. All we did was borrow from the second half of the year into the first half of the year. To that end, this first half of this year was abysmal compared to the first half of last year, but the second half made up for that. So we're going to sell many more units, more sales units. The average sale price is still lower. And what we see in all price points that even the investors and those folks that have equity are figuring out that the bottom has been determined. So every day we're ticking on watching an interest rate, which is historic lows again. But when it does tick, historically, it always ticked up 2%, and that could happen any time.
Yeah. Ed, institutionally, what are your thoughts?
I'm on board. We've seen businesses getting done, like David said. We had the best leasing quarter in 4 years that we had our last published quarter. So certainly business is getting done, but the inflow of migration business into the area isn't what it used to be, and business expansion based on headcount isn't what it used to be, and we need that really to resume in a meaningful way for really to get back on track. The bottoming out has occurred, exactly what Pat said, but the uplift isn't there and won't be there until the housing market clears so people can move again, and when employers go back to hiring people and the headcount expands. You
know what, Patrick, Edward talked a lot about it, migration here. Is that, have we seen a different migration pattern forming here in the Carolinas? Because for many years, in-migration bailed us out of a lot of issues. Is that going to be different this time?
it's going to come back. It obviously slowed with the current condition, people not able to sell what they have and not able to price what they wanted to buy and all like that. But I think what we all agree is that the Carolinas had different pockets, some more successful than others. Adele Webb selling 220 units near Charlotte is going to be sensational. Lake Carolina in the suburbs of Columbia selling a couple hundred units year on year, 2 years in a row, not bad. But I guess what I see is the Carolinas being a pretty sweet spot in terms of in-migration for the industrial reasons, for the high-tech reasons in the Research Triangle Park, for the resort and the retirement reasons. For example, North Carolina is just about to announce a certified retirement town program where towns all over North Carolina can certify themselves and be attracted to that market. Over the next 20 years, it's going to be a very nice piece of the pie for them.
Okay, well, specifically, and just a quick question about that. Is that more specific about, yeah, that's a nice piece to have, but it's not going to be a huge driver for any one town like Hilton Head or Aiken or those towns that have traditionally lent themselves to that type of retirement community? Or will there be a broader impact on that? David, do you have any idea about that?
I think each market continues to define itself. And
yeah, you said something before the program. Sorry to interrupt you, but you said there's a difference now than there was 5 or 10 years ago. Not
right.
Everything's moving in lockstep. Is that?
I don't think it is. I think each of the markets throughout the Carolinas has to define itself, both even from a residential standpoint to a commercial standpoint. Who are they and what do they want to become? Because they're going after the market throughout the United States to try to attract jobs. And whether you are in aerospace in Charleston or you're in the banking industry in Charlotte, which we hope regains its composure, I think you really want to target and become a specialist even in your own city and try to attract those jobs to the city, because I agree with Ed. We're not out of it until we start to see the jobs being created and the inward migration of those jobs back to the Carolinas.
And that housing market has got to clear for that to happen. I mean,
right.
North Carolina, South Carolina.
When you say clear, Ed, what do you mean?
Well, we're a great catcher's mitt for relocation. States like California, New York, Massachusetts, they've been hemorrhaging people for years. And then in 2009, they hemorrhaged only a third of the people that they had been hemorrhaging in 2005. And we were the beneficiary of a lot of that. But now, if the 5 of us ran a business in another region of this country, and we wanted to relocate that business and 200 of our key employees here, much akin to the way that IBM did when they came to RTP 50 years ago, we couldn't do that today because we'd be tagged with 200, 250 single-family home fee simple titles because they can't sell their homes. So they're marooned there. Now, if we wanted to come and start a business, it's a great place to do it. But if we needed to move employees from another region, it's hard to do it because they can't clear that house.
Oh, we're the envy of the entire world.
Well, but let me ask you this way, and right off of what Ed said, it's a great way to say it, Ed, about being a catcher's mitt. Chiquita just announced that they're going to Charlotte, 400 jobs, $100,000 plus on the average job employment number there. But that seemed like it was an expensive way to get growth at $22 million, and I guess we could debate that, Pat. But is that what we're going to have to do going forward to get to attract the in-migration? Are we going to have to pay up more for those kind of deals?
I think we have to be very selective. I think if it's a Fortune 50, Fortune 100, Fortune 200 company, I think you have to look at 21,000 jobs around the world, our connectivity to the world, and attracting other worldwide companies. I think you have to hang some of those specialty firms on a hook, because Fortune 500 companies follow other Fortune 500 companies, and they will tell you our airport is what was the key driver, plus the business environment. And I think we, as far as the Carolinas, looking at the entire country, people are looking to the Carolinas. It's the best pro-business. It's the best place to raise a family. It's the best place to live, work. We're attracting the creative types. You can't look at the Charlotte region or the Triangle. The world's looking at the Carolinas, and we complement what the Triangle has. We complement what the upstate South Carolina has. If you look in Charleston, if you look at what we offer to the world, it's a compelling story, and they're going to come. It's just a matter of selling that property to get here. And corporations today don't really want to buy in someone's home. They don't want to deal with it. They say, we have a job for you, get here. And that's why the rental market is a 97% occupancy now, and rents are off the roof because people are not finding it conducive to sell at the price they want. If they'll sell at today's market, they could they could be.
Next week on our program, just a quick program note, Kim Saunders is the CEO of Mechanics and Farmers Bank out of Durham, and she will be here joining us. Pat, have people figured out the formula that the Carolinas have been able to do to do growth?
The customers that are moving here, or the people
I'm sorry. I would say from the competitor standpoint, Alabama, Florida, Virginia.
They are very competitive. Certainly Alabama, with what they've done with tourism and the Gulf Trail, introducing people to the state of Alabama via a wonderful tourism experience, which is not unlike what we've done in North and South Carolina for 30, 40 years. We have great expertise in attracting and presenting ourselves as a tourism destination. That is the way someone, a CEO or a plumber, finds out that this could be a great place to live. And they start to plant that seed, and then they end up calling the Tate team and selling them a home. So they're up on us. We've got other competitors. We've got Panama. I'm going to live in Panama like a king and a queen and have steak every day and use the dollar and speak English. So it's not just us. We do have a global market, and the globe looks at us as a pretty attractive place, but there are other opportunities.
Let's talk about the price of growth for just a second here. This is a little bit more specific to not just the residential, but commercial real estate. I'm going to start with you, David. In North Carolina specifically, in mid-November, not long ago now, the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld a Court of Appeals decision to say that impact fees that were charged developers from municipalities was unconstitutional when it came to impact fees being applied to growing schools and building schools. From a developer standpoint, that would seem like a win, but the larger picture is here. How do we grow schools when schools and education are already under enormous pressure? And give us your take on that. And Ed, I'm going to ask you the same thing, just as a heads up. It's coming to you.
Municipalities used impact fees to control growth or drive growth where they wanted it to be. They also used it as a mechanism for paying for the infrastructure that new jobs or new residences would create.
So, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but let me stop you there. So impact fees were a subtle way of imposing public policy?
It was. It was. The public policy of whoever was in office at that given time. I think now with the lack of the ability for a municipality not to have those impact fees, they've got to figure out another way to pay for the infrastructure. And they will do it. Some way or another. They'll do it through taxation, they'll do it through some other fees, but they'll come up with a way to recoup that revenue that they're losing from impact fees.
Ed, is this what to kind of David's point, is this like whack-a-mole where it comes up on one, you hit it, and there's going to be a fee show up somewhere?
Well, I agree. The fees are going to be there, but the truth of the matter is that we can't recruit strong individuals, creative individuals, entities, businesses here without a good educational system. So it needs to be funded, and where those fees come from, whether it's a developer or residential taxes or gas tax, it's got to come because we can't attract Chiquita here. We can't keep big business here and get more. We're recruiting right now an individual from out of the region. Number one question, I need to understand the schools. My wife needs to come up, so the one who's really going to make the decision about the move needs to understand the schools. So we have to have a great education system, and where those dollars come from, they're going to come out of our pockets in one way or another, and quite frankly, they need to.
Pat, you've been involved with this kind of discussion for a while here. What's the answer?
We're heavy into the development side of it. I want to take another swing at that. When you're talking about shovel-ready land and development impact fees, they've been kind of absent for quite some time residentially. When we were asked why is there going to be price, if we hit the bottom, why is there going to be price compaction in 2012? Well, the number one reason is that we still have an inventory of
price compaction on
next year for 2012
on home prices.
We're going to sell more homes, but price impaction depreciation is still going to continue in not all markets, in some markets, another year. One reason is because of shovel-ready lots that are being bought up by builders at 50, 60 cents on the dollar, and they're able to build what the buyers want at a phenomenal price, and they are attracting a lot of that buying opportunities that are out there, coupled with the wave that's still coming of aged, depressed inventory that's coming out much slower than we have ever anticipated as far as forcing these properties through the pipeline. And everybody says, well, why?
The foreclosed properties,
yes,
or just the inventory?
They're distressed.
Okay.
Why? We expected that to be cleared, by August. Now they're saying probably next year. And the only thing that we can conclude, and whether it's factual or not, is whether the lending institutions would have to add head count to push that through. Headcount at a time when they don't want to add headcount, that it won't bring one additional dollar of revenue to the shareholders. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So on the one hand, it's good that we're easing that out slowly. And the other hand, it's not good because it's lagging that confidence, because the only thing that's holding the market back residentially right now is I don't want to make a mistake. So buyers are holding back, saying, I don't want to buy something, whether it's new or resale, and find out that it's reduced another $10,000 to the guy who walked in next month.
Right, and I would guess the first step on any of this is going to be access to financing. Ed, you're a little bit of an anomaly here that the real estate investment trust that is Highwoods has access to a lot of capital, not just cash on hand, but also leverage. So I guess the question is, the question that you're going to answer and the question, David, that you're going to answer about access to capital are going to be two different. Ed, I'll start with you. Access to capital, is it prohibitive for you to be able to grow your business in at all?
We have no, every RFP we respond to, we state that our prerequisite is that it's not dependent on any financing contingencies whatsoever. We have access to public equity. We have access to public and private debt. It's not an issue for us. Our challenge is to be good custodians and fiduciaries with the entrustment of those dollars, whether they come from the debt or the equity side. So I basically get paid to manage a balance sheet. And if we're prudent in our management of the balance sheet, then we'll be awarded more equity and we'll be awarded more debt. And we just recast our credit facility. We upped it to $475 million, and we're at 150 over LIBOR. So today we sit here under 2% on $475 million worth of monies available through the revolver, in addition to our other sources. So our challenge is, how do we properly deploy it, be sure that the spend is in sync with the risk profile?
Is it that hard to find properties? Good properties, quality properties?
Yeah, Chris, it's really in a few buckets. So one is properties that you don't want to buy because they don't fit our criteria with regard to quality and location and what the asset can be on the upside. Two is that it's an asset that we would love to have, but so does everybody else. So the pricing is driven to a high 5 cap rate, and it's not something that we're going to play in. And then three is you've got to find where the opportunity is where others aren't. And we feel like we did that. In late September, we spent a little over $200 million in downtown Pittsburgh. And we feel like we hit them where they ain't. We've looked hard in D.C., we've looked hard in Austin and some other places, but the pricing is out of sync with the risk profile. We found a great opportunity in Pittsburgh with an asset that's been undermanaged. And we think that's our opportunity, is to bring upside to it, because it's it was a very good development the day that it was conceived and delivered. So the bone, the skeleton is all there. And now it's our opportunity to lift it to where the market is. There's 6.8% unemployment rate in Pittsburgh. It's a great market, but we kind of got in where we think others aren't right now.
Is that a good problem that Ed talks about, having plenty of access to capital and just trying to cherry pick through what the properties are?
Yeah, it's a good problem to have, but you know, the private investor or the private LLC, the private equity that's out there, they're challenged by it. They've got to go to the debt markets to try to finance a property, and it means more equity required on the front end. And so that means they've got to have a better property. They've got to make sure that the returns are there, and typically they can't compete in that market when a publicly traded company, or excuse me, publicly traded fund has the equity there, sitting there, and they can go buy the assets. So the individual investor or the private equity fund, they're struggling a little bit more in where to place their dollars because they can't get the debt for the property.
And we all hear the same rhetoric that the banks are saying. They want to lend, they are lending, but also when you go up to apply for a loan to any bank, the restrictive is prohibitive. So, David, do you think banks could do a better job at lending?
I think banks could do a better job, but it goes further than that, and it goes to the regulatory agencies that are controlling the banks. The banks want to push the money out, but they're being regulated.
You look on the residential side, you have a lot of very, very good builders that are very sound, but they can't get the money today, even with a buyer contract, unless the buyer goes and takes the construction mortgage. They're just out of that arena. The P&Ls, you know, I want to lend the money, but the P&Ls for most builders the last 2, 3, 4 years don't support don't support that lend.
And Pat, let's stay with you for just a second. How much of a fallout rate, and that is, I hope I use this correctly, I don't live and breathe the industry like you do, but how much of a fallout rate, and that is the people that buy the homes that can't buy the homes once they indicate that they want to buy a homes, how much of that is going on now? Is it higher than it has been?
Unfortunately, historically, it's about 14 to 18% of contracts written don't make it to the goal line. Just announced this week nationally, it's about 33%. I would say here in the Carolinas, it's probably closer to 25, 28%. That's for a couple of reasons. One is the appraisal process. The seller's already feeling that they're taking it on the chin. And then the inspection comes in number two. That's the other hit because historically you used to negotiate who's going to repair what. But now the seller does that too.
Right.
So you have the one on the price, the second on the inspection, and the third punch comes when the appraiser comes out. I testified in Washington that I was telling these fellows that we probably have somebody puts 20% down, we probably should do away with an appraisal because the buyer and seller have agreed. Both are pretty beat up by now.
Right.
To send somebody out for an opinion on appraisal today, and appraisal today is just one person's opinion, and it's a shot in the dark.
You could almost hear the hoorays when you said that. We got about 4 minutes left. Pat, I want to start with you, and I really want to get to this point. You talk about D.C. You're in the state capitol. You're in the state capitol. I guess the question I want to ask is, and it's not just about political leadership, but why can't we find middle ground anymore when it comes to not just public debate, but public policy around real estate? Why can't we find that middle ground that we so desperately need?
Well, I could say IQ of our leadership and good judgment, which comes up for me a lot, and that's the direction I'm going in terms of who I'm evaluating in terms of voting for, essentially, behind the curtain in the booth. I think that's where we have to go. We have to look for those that have some business experience and that have good judgment, and the ones that can see through the IQ test, quite honestly. That's my biggest disappointment. But going back to the shadow inventory and all that we are hurting by, what about the HARP 2 and the elimination of the appraisal in terms of that, and the 7 million existing homeowners that could get some relief in terms of reappraisals or refis? Is that going to help at all, do you think? And
anything helps that unlock the puzzle pieces and to free opportunities up for individuals. But I think it's very difficult to understand. It's not easy, and in a world today where everything's in snippets, I think it's a program, and again, another program where for the JOQ public to go in and get their arms around it, it's a lot to grasp.
But the cure to all this goes back to what you said. A lot of this really is D.C. It's alternate agendas, it's preservationism, it's a set of rules that applies to one elite group and not to the rest of us. A lot of that absolutely has to be flushed out, and I think we'd be way ahead of the game had the Simpson-Bowles report been enacted. It's almost as if I don't take cancer lightly, but if you come in with cancer and the answer is Simpson-Bowles, and then they dismiss that, and then 2 years later put together a super-duper committee that comes out to be a super-duper failure, and there's still no prognosis on it. Here's what we're going to do to try and make you better. And I feel like we could be a year and a half into being better if we all agree that we're going to have to take a hard hit and fix this thing, and now we're a year and a half, two later, and we've put together another committee, and we're still no further along.
We got here because Americans left. Everybody says because of loose lending practices. It was an American housing policy to say that everyone should own a home.
Do you think Occupy Wall Street ought to be Occupy D.C.? Do you think they just got their geography wrong?
No, I think we as Americans left the equities market. We were disenchanted, coupled with low interest rates, coupled with loose lending housing policy. You put those three together, we are where we are. Now, none of us, nobody in Washington, nobody sitting around this table has ever been here before.
A few default swaps went in there in that mix too. Right?
So we have to figure this out together, and it's going to be a lot of work. The only thing that I would say is every time in the housing side the government got involved, it got worse. So I'm very hesitant that the government's going to solve this free enterprise system. We'd have to take the medicine and work it through. bite by bite.
Yeah, I wish we had more time. Thanks for being on the program. David, I didn't even give you a chance to talk about what goes on in the State House in Columbia, and that I know that would be a whole other program, and I know you're glad I didn't. Thank you. Thank you. Pat, good to see you. Thank you. Ed, good to have you on the program again. Patrick, thank you. Good to see you. Happy holidays. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.